Here's Shed. Off the window, no. Roberts tried to get it. Shed for the win. Got it. Jamal Shed plays the hero again.
Back to pass. Donovan Smith. Smith steps up in the pocket, unloads it, throws it all the way downfield into the end zone. Tipped, and it is caught. Caught by the Cougars. Caught for a touchdown. Unbelievable. Caught by Stephon Johnson.
Stick it in your pipe and smoke it, baby. Yes!
Welcome to the Scott and Holm podcast. Back here mid-February, the podcast that answers the question, what if two millennial Houston Cougar alums talked about Houston Cougar sports? Back here during that sweet spot of the spring sports season starting, the winter sports season, really getting into high gear. Top 10 Cougar men's basketball team to talk about, which has had a big Monday, both the big capital B, capital M, lowercase b, lowercase m, Monday win over Baylor. Great to see Emmanuel Sharp back. A huge, huge, huge Saturday game to come at Arizona. A spring sport that is close to our hearts, starting that we're going to talk about multiple spring sports in total on the docket. A little football offseason news that we did not have time to get to in last week's jam-packed episode as well. Bobby, you are back in your home base. How's it hanging, man?
Great, man. Great. It's cold in Dallas. It was warm last week, and just a funny little side note. I work retail, so I do I take random days off throughout the week, just whenever I don't have something going on. And I took Tuesday off last week because it was beautiful out, it was supposed to be beautiful out. Cloud, rains, high of 50. The next day I'm out of town for 2 days. It's 80 degrees in Dallas. I come home, I take Friday off. There's tennis match, which we'll talk about later. I'm like, it's at noon, so I decided I'm going to go early.
It looks pretty, in your pictures from the course, it looked kind of like cold and gray.
Yeah, it was cold and gray, and I could have gone after tennis, but it was like 2:33, like that wouldn't have worked, so it was a whole disaster. I took 2 days off to try and play golf, and it was the two worst days to play golf. So, sorry, just a funny little story there.
As I say, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes or something like that, like what everyone from every municipality says. Except here it's just constantly it's mostly sunny and between 60 and 120 degrees. Yeah, that's your target there. Bobby, it's been a little jam-packed to do the usual housekeeping at the top recently. We've kind of dived into stuff as quickly as possible. I won't spend a whole ton of time at the top, but it's been a while since I mentioned our network friends, the 1012 network. Our network friends still very much talking all things Big 12 over in the 1012 podcast, and a number of fantastic sister school podcasts there. If you don't already, please follow them at TEN12 Network wherever you do social media. And of course, if you don't do so already, please consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com, patreon.com/SH podcast. Those $5 a month, you can support the work that Bobby and I do on a weekly basis. Bonus pods and just supporting an independent 10 years and running weekly Houston Cougar podcast like the one the two of us are doing here. So any of that sounds good to you, patreon.com/SH podcast.
A podcast that doesn't try to start beef with other Houston sports personalities or get into beef with other Houston sports personalities. Boy, Twitter was fun today. Sorry.
I only know half this, and I'd be like, I'm not on there anymore. Like, no one wants to hear your fart sniffing like nonsense, but I'm also not on there anymore. So, like, what's the beef? Is this about Chris Baldwin? Baldwin getting roasted by Kelvin Sampson? Like, what's going on? What are people chattering about?
Sorry, Sampson. I don't want to delve into this too much, but
we will leave this to. I'm looking at the recording mark. We're at 3:45 right now, Bobby. At 5:30, I will cut you off whether you're missing or not. Go for it.
Perfect. So, basically, Chris Baldwin asked Sampson a question last night. Sampson was like, you ask that same question every time. Kind of snapped at him. Kind of out of character for Sampson.
Kelvin does to reporters he likes, too. That's just Kelvin.
Yeah,
sorry.
Exactly. So, people on Coug fans were talking about it, and I don't know if you know this, Go Cougs now owns Coug fans. Ryan Monceau gets on there, and Ryan Monceau's like, yeah, no one respects Baldwin, because people were like, why did he snap at Baldwin? He said, no one respects Baldwin. He just kisses ass.
100% fact.
He just kisses ass to get there. Boom. And then all of a sudden, And then Baldwin responds on Twitter. Sellers jumps in and starts talking smack. Then, like, Duarte's catching strays. Duarte, rightly and smartly, is staying out of this one. And then you have my arch nemesis, what's his face?
Mark Berman.
Mark Berman get in there, and Mark Berman starts being like, everyone knows Chris Baldwin is a great reporter, blah, blah, blah.
Speaking of people that nobody who works with likes.
and so then they just started, everyone got their calls out. Then Monceau on Go Cougs in that same thread was like, yeah, I probably should have taken that shot at Baldwin, which he probably should have taken that shot at Baldwin, no matter how you feel about Baldwin. We probably shouldn't be taking shots at each other. It was just a whole thing that I am very glad that you and I just kind of watch from afar.
Look at that. You got 15. I was going to give you another 15, 20 seconds because I interrupted, but got that in before the 5:30.
It's really not that important at the end of the day.
It also just, I will just say, very funny that Rob Sellers, somebody who,
you know, my feelings,
phones it in more than any, like, I don't think, and like for any, like, thing I don't like about Baldwin's coverage, I think it is just too much, like, puffy positive stuff to get access. Fine, whatever. He does, like, put stuff out regularly. He does go to games. He does, like, actually, like, do some of the things that beat writers do. And Rob Sellers just has been phoning it in for 15-ish years. Anyway, let's talk about the top 10 basketball team, Bobby. Before I make anyone else in the U of H space madder at me than they already are.
No, buddy, we could never.
So, your Cougar men's basketball.
We're the OGs on the block, by the way. You guys are the OGs on the
block. Are you sure? Because theoretically, Rob Sellers has been operating a U of H website since like 2009, 2010.
Yep, I said what I said.
Anyway, all right. Top 10 Cougar men's basketball team. Played 2 games in the past week. Obviously, the one of more import was the win from last night over Baylor, the big Monday ESPN game. ESPNU game, excuse me, another thing. From a big notable basketball player got us moved to a different channel, but we won't dive. I've already roasted that trade enough and made you feel bad about it enough. I'm not going to actually go into that, but we'll go in our usual chronological order because you did play on Saturday against Colorado, and every game is kind of part of the tapestry of the season. And I don't think if you're keeping the quilt and tapestry metaphor going, I don't think the Colorado section of it is one that we're going to look back on, kind of like the Oklahoma State game directly before it. You're not going to look back on that one. You're going to look back on it and be like, oh, cool, we didn't lose to the team that's 0 for the Big 12, and that's about the nice thing I could say about it. Again, was a 10-point win where I don't think 10 points is fair to Colorado for how competitive they made it. You looked very much like a shorthanded team. Colorado looked very much outside of Julian Hammond like a team that's 0 for the Big 12. I think we all just got done with it. We're like, okay, glad we didn't lose that one. Let's never think about that again.
Yeah, I think the funny thing for me is it's another game where, it was down to 54-50 at one point. And
it was only a 2-point U of H lead inside of 6 minutes to play.
Yeah. I definitely don't think the 10-point spread really speaks, like you said, to how close this game actually was. 54-50 at one point. Still really funny as, you read the reactions to the game. You'd have thought this game was, look, would I have liked it to have been more of a blowout? Yeah, sure. And you just see it, and there's kind of some coverage and people talking, on social media about how good was the defense. The defense looked like it still held them under 60. And that's impressive no matter which D1 school you're playing. So, I don't know why, but that just kind of makes me laugh how we're always just kind of like, oh man, the defense kind of lagged a little bit. And you're like, oh no, they shot under, they didn't score 60 points, so, I just kind of like to point that out that we still held them under 60. Granted, it's 59. It's not that far under 60, but still under 60 is pretty good. Cougs essentially ran a 6-man rotation. JoJo Tugler, I just want to point out, with the most JoJo Tugler line of all time.
So glad this is not getting buried.
0 points, 10 rebounds, just the single double. But usually if you're going to see a single double, it's usually 12 points, no assists, no rebounds, no anything like that. And it's 0 points, 10 boards. That's JoJo Tugler. Gonna JoJo Tugler sometimes, and you're okay with that. A little concerned with how easy Hammond got his 22, but not anything that I'm panicking about yet. I'll talk a little bit about this more when we kind of dive into that more important game, like you said, in the Baylor game. But I am getting a little concerned with how well the guards are starting to score against this Cougar team. Not that I necessarily think we should be hitting the panic button yet, but that was kind of a takeaway for me in this game. Was it felt like Hammond scored just a little too easy, but it also kind of felt like one of those situations where you said, if anyone's going to beat us, it's going to be Hammond, so we're not going to let anyone else score. He's going to have to beat us, and fortunately for us, he didn't.
And, I think I agree with you, by the way. At a certain point, if it keeps happening that opposing guards are going off against you, it's not just bad luck. It's not just, oh, hey, we're to some degree, I think that there is some of that there. Right now, U of H is 93rd in the country in opponent 3-point field goal percentage. That would be, if the season finished now, the worst number that Sampson's had, I think, since his first season, and the first time since the 2016-2017 season, the last team that didn't go to the NCAAs, that U of H was outside the national top 31. I think we're going to finish close to the average. I do think this is a bit of an anomalous stretch. But also, it keeps happening. At a certain point, it is probably something you're doing defensively. Is it an on the whole bad defensive effort? No, and I'm not saying you're describing it as such. But style points usually aren't something that I think we're terribly concerned with in a true road game. But to say it for not the first time, Colorado is 0 for Big 12 play. And coming into this game immediately off, Colorado was off a double-digit loss to Utah. That Utah team we saw barely look like they were playing the same sport as the Cougs. This is a bad basketball team. And I wouldn't say that about a lot of Big 12 teams. Like Oklahoma State is not a good Big 12 team. Oklahoma State's a respectable team. Oklahoma State, I think, is better than they were in November. It is giving that fan base enough reason to say, hey, maybe that coach long-term there can succeed. Wouldn't say about Colorado. Colorado's not a good team.
Nope.
But also, you were missing Emmanuel Sharp. And yes, you theoretically had Javier Francis, and he was cleared to play for this game, but barely played because of foul trouble, was getting the Breon Brady treatment. And I mean that in both ways. I mean that both, and that Breon was often good for those fouls, and also Breon got targeted, I think, sometimes. I think Javier's 4 and 4 minutes was very much kind of a reminder of the Breon. We miss you, Breon. The Breon Brady experience from his 2 years as your Cougar starting 5-6 years ago at this point. I mean, glass half full. You didn't have to play Javier Francis a bunch before that big game 48 hours later against Baylor. But I mean, glass half empty. You really would have liked for Francis to be able to spell Tugler and or Roberts a bit more than the foul trouble actually allowed him to. And so much of what Colorado did successfully, what we talked about, was Julian Hammond having a fantastic game. Not for the first time this season. He had 20 plus in some previous close losses that Colorado had to UCF and West Virginia earlier in Big 12 play. And he also had 16 in their surprise win over UConn back in November. But also, this keeps happening. You keep allowing opposing players to go off against you. Did it against Baylor. As much as nearly everything I'm going to say about the Baylor game coming up is positive, it keeps happening. Is some of it, is there some bad luck in there? Sure, it's not 100% bad defense. It's rarely 100% bad defense. Your opponent has to make the shots. Your opponent has to be skilled as well. But it has been a not vintage run defensively. Also, great game from Wani Roberts. Ruthlessly efficient game from Wani Roberts. I wanted to highlight a couple plays. This is far from a comprehensive list, but a couple of the ones that caught my eye in real time. This first one was about inside of 8 minutes of the first half. Roberts catches the ball near the free throw line. He was right on the Big 12 logo. Puts a move on 2 different Colorado players. Teardrop layup in the bucket. Gets the foul call. Gorgeous stuff. The definition of great big men play. And then later on in the second half, I think that was just inside of 14 minutes left in the game, he was going against the taller Elijah Malone, another veteran big man, does the classic Wani move of backing the guy in, hits the baby hook shot, and draws the foul. Music, or I said chicken soup for my soul. I was going to say music to my ears, but it doesn't really work in this case. Chicken soup to my soul to see the Colorado fan, doing the holding up the hands, what's going on? Just that's the Wani Roberts experience, baby. He was so good in this one. The Baylor effort that we're going to talk about, not to keep talking about the Baylor game in an entirely different game section, but that was such a balanced effort. This wasn't a balanced effort, but boy, what Roberts gave you just reminded you how good he is to his team, how much you're going to miss him after the season. He was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Wani, when you need Wani shows up for you. So, like you said, kind of a vintage Wani performance there.
It kind of ends up this game. It really feels like, other than it being a road game, we're saying a lot of the same things that we said about the Oklahoma State game that was immediately before this one. And the games weren't carbon copies, but my general takeaway is largely the same. Not a vintage effort, but if you lost this game, you would have been one of the, if not the story in men's college basketball, not in a good way, if you lost this game. Last week, we were talking about how after the loss to Tech, U of H ended up being one of the lead stories on like the Ion College Basketball podcast. I'm sure every other media outlet covering college basketball, if this had ended up being CU's first conference win, you better believe you would have had a hard time ignoring the U of H news once again. I mean, maybe this is my feelings being colored by the fact that U of H 48 hours later would go on to win. And I know this already, but it's one of those where you're grateful that U of H survived and avoided one of the last really bad potholes on the regular season schedule. Because looking at the rest of the schedule, the only opponents that would come close to fitting that description of bad loss are Arizona State on the road a week from today and Cincy at home the first Saturday of March. And even those teams are much better than Colorado has been this year. All your other opponents, Kansas, Arizona, Baylor, Iowa State, Texas Tech, are all teams that are stone cold locks or very, very close to it for the field of 68. This was the last really bad regular season loss you could have taken. And I guess my last thought is I'm glad that we didn't see the Cougs metaphorically step in that pothole.
Yep. Absolutely.
And the game that we already can't stop talking about, even in preview or even in recapping the Colorado game, came last night, the 76-65 win by your Cougars over the Baylor Bears. At long last, our first U of H Baylor men's basketball Big 12 game at the Fertitta Center, the first since the last season in the Southwest Conference on campus at U of H, a 76-65 win that the Cougs never trailed in, and the reverse of the last game, an 11-point final margin that was not at all reflective of how not close this game was in its latter stages. And I would say more than about any other opponent we've seen this year, Baylor got easy looks. And Baylor forced defensive breakdowns that you're just not used to seeing from the Cougars. And yet Baylor never held any lead in this game. And for the last 30 minutes of this game, to differing degrees, this wasn't really close. Baylor, I think, did a good job keeping it around kind of that 7 to 9 point margin in the closing stages of the second half, but wasn't able to make a game of it early in the second half when that window was open. And what I've said a few times now is this is 11-point final margin, but this was a 25-point game when the Cougs called off the Dogs with about 5 minutes left. And after, I think, less than spectacular efforts in your last two games against OSU and Colorado, grateful that this game was never in any kind of doubt. Bobby, how are you feeling after last night's win, and what are your big takeaways?
Yeah, pretty crazy to think the Bears shot 60% from three and 58% from the field as a whole. A big difference between the two teams was the turnovers and the points off them, right? The Cougs had 28, and I want to say it was 14 for Baylor in a game in which you win by 12. It's it's kind of a big deal. And like you said, kind of called the Dogs off with about 15 minutes left to go in the game or 10 minutes left to go in the game. Yeah, you think it was about 5 minutes? You could really tell. I don't know. It seemed like about 10 minutes. It was kind of like, I mean,
it wasn't right. It was 71-46 was the biggest lead the Cougars had. It wasn't right at that mark. Basically, at the point, God bless him, I'm not trying to pick on the kid. Basically, at the point that Sampson put Mercy Miller in the game.
Yeah.
That's what I would say it was.
Yeah. Watching the game, like I said, like I talked about in the Colorado game, teams are starting to really see success going in some kind of version of ISO, whether they're getting the switch that they want, and they got Wani kind of out at the top against the guard. And Wani has shown he can defend that against at sometimes, but you don't like Wani on a guard. You're seeing some ISO game there. Even just various kind of cleared out ISO against one of our guards. Whether that's LJ, whether that's Milos, whether that's Sharp, right? You're just kind of seeing guys get some easy shots, get some separation. I'm not saying this team is like floundering defensively or anything like that, but it's just kind of one of those things you're starting to see where it's like, okay, teams are figuring out that if they hit the pick and roll, right, we're going to have that monster defense, that kind of trap defense, and we're going to try and turn the ball over. If you don't set a pick and maybe you do some off ball screens and things like that and get yourself into some good matchups via that you can really exploit this U of H defense a little bit. I'm not saying it's necessarily a cause for major concern or something like that. Just something I kind of noticed. And even Baylor in that game was getting some really open looks against that monster defense. You saw them being able to pass out, and I think Frame Forcilla was the one doing the game last night. I can't remember.
Yeah, he was. It was him and Shambi. Yep.
Yeah, he was talking a lot about that second pass. With U of H, half the times you're not even able to get that first pass out, and they were able to kind of break that monster trap, and then you kind of saw the Cougs scramble, and as you know, Sam, when we run that monster, the free guy is the roller, right, is the big man roller, and usually somebody comes over. They were being able to pass out of it to find a guard who could then hit the roller. So, they were just able to pass their way out of it, get themselves out of some trouble. And that's just kind of something I just have noticed over the last couple of games. And you kind of see it in KenPom, right? The defensive rating for the Cougs, you've gone from first to third. Not that you're, way up or you're falling way behind or anything like that. But it's definitely something that, like, you just kind of have noticed, right? It seems that defensive efficiency has just kind of fallen a little bit more and more as we've gotten through the last 3 games. So really wanting to see what's going to happen in a future game that we are going to talk about where they have a good guard. How does this defense match up against a good guard, a really top flight, arguably top 10 player in the country at the guard position?
I would just also say that Baylor was showing you a very, very unique look. They lost, mea culpa for not catching that when we did the preview of them. This guy went down with a season-ending injury in their previous game against UCF. They lost Josh Ojiawuna. Well, I would say they're true big man on the roster, and it ran, for all intents and purposes, a 4-guard lineup with Norchad Omir, who is one of the smallest centers in the country. Very much kind of reminds me of when we 2 seasons ago ran Wani at the 5. It's like, yes, he has some of these skills, but you probably don't want this guy, for all he does very well at the college level, to be your true 5,
right? Which
is what Omeyer is now. But also, like, that's a unique look, and I'm really interested in how this works for Baylor down the stretch of the season. I don't know defensively how it's going to work, but they're going to be a bear to stop. No pun intended. Like, they're going to be quite good at scoring the basketball with this lineup, with guys as skilled as Langston Love and VJ Edgecombe. Wasn't really a vintage game from Jeremy Roach, but I would say he's good enough that this game won't be representative of what he does. So I agree with everything you said, but also what Baylor is doing now with this new no Ojiawuna rotation that they have is going to look very, very much different than what I think most other opponents are going to throw at the Cougars. Certainly what Arizona is going to throw at the Cougars here this week. And I'm not saying teams won't ever show a 4-guard lineup to the Cougs, but I think it's worth acknowledging how unique a look Baylor is going to present. Even acknowledging the larger, not great trends, which is that teams that come in with a good offensive pedigree like Baylor, Texas Tech, teams with not so good of an offensive pedigree like Colorado, Oklahoma State previously, are making shots against the Cougars and making shots at it's a pretty good clip. Yeah. I will say, and I alluded to this earlier, one of the most balanced Cougar offensive efforts in a good long while. 6 different players had at least 9 points for the Cougs last night. I always try to pick an MVP for the premium episodes, and the answer for this one was a little less straightforward than some recent games. Like, you can make a case for several guys here. I'm curious, Bobby, who would your game MVP be? Like, just gut pick. You don't have to like do a big nuanced case from watching this one. Who'd you pick?
Yeah, I think I would kind of go. That's tough.
Because there's multiple right answers.
Yes, I think you could really make an argument for anybody in this game, but I would probably go with LJ Cryer. Led the team in scoring on 31 minutes, 14, 5 of 11 from the field, 4 of 7 from 3-point. Really kind of like that performance. Thought he looked good on the defensive side as well.
Yeah, it felt like all 5 of the shots he hit were at key moments.
Yep.
As well. That just stuck out to me. My pick was Uzan.
Yeah.
In a game where you won it basically because of your ability to turn this opponent over, which Uzan was a big part of, and also your ability to take care of the basketball much better than your opponent. I think Milos Uzan's 6 assists and 0 turnovers really stand out. Also, I think it was a positive view offensively. 12 points on 4 of 9 from the field, 2 steals. So a lot of guys you can make a case for. Cryer, Uzan. I think Arsenault, you can kind of make a dark horse case for him as well. I think looks a little more comfortable coming back, from in his bench role and kind of his first man with that unit versus kind of filling in for Emmanuel Sharp. Though it was very nice to see Emmanuel Sharp out there, and I don't think it's him 100%, but I would say, man, this might have been Sharp's best game since the first West Virginia game. Because it kind of just feels like he's been either out hurt or kind of playing half hurt in all the games since then.
Yeah, I definitely think this is the healthiest he's looked in a long time. You had a lot of confidence when I think pretty early on, he steps back and hits a long 3 in early on in this game. I think it might have been one of his.
I want to say it was the second made shot. Like it definitely got the crowd going.
It was, sorry, I'm looking it up. It was the first made shot.
First made shot.
A minute into the game with 18:58 left. It was the first made shot, and he shot that from way downtown. I did want to point out just kind of a funny moment, if I could, from the press conference following this game, in which didn't involve the media too much. There was a moment where in the press conference, he had Terrence Arsenault with him. Coach Sampson did. He had Milos Uzan and Terrence Arsenault with him. And he talks about how Terrence Arsenault had a great game the game before, and he thought that he thinks that Terrence thought it was going to be a comma to continue this great thing, and he didn't realize that the end of the game is a period. You're starting a new sentence. And he said Terrence came out and shot what he called the ugliest shot he's ever seen. He said he put it up and he thought that it was a 23-foot shot that he shot 30 feet. Sampson said, "I'm really glad it didn't hit any of our guys in the head." And I don't know why, but that was so freaking funny to me, because you see Arsenault and Uzan just bust out laughing, and he goes, Terrence, did you think that it was good when it left your hand? Because if it did, we need to have a talk. And he was like, "No, I knew as soon as I let it go, it wasn't good." And he goes, "You didn't think it was short, right?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "I thought it was long. I didn't think it was that long." And Coach goes, "Me neither."
Great line for the broadcast. I don't know if you caught this as well. Like they went back to this a couple times, talking about use it. And I talk a lot of about Fran Fraschilla on here. But I think something, and I'm glad he actually brings this up for the non-U of H fans tuning in, because there's a decent amount of those. U of H is a pretty well-ranked team. It's a big Monday game, so you're the college basketball audience is kind of a captive audience if you're a nationally televised game like the Cougars. But points out that a lot of the U of H point guards of recent past got to learn under somebody. I think where that breaks down, you go to Galen Robinson, the Godfather, but that Jamal Shea got to spend a year learning while Dejan Jarreau was here. That Uzan basically came in here and had to be the guy, and that's challenge. That's challenging. Kelvin Sampson expects a lot from his point guards, and the Kelvin line. And I might be butchering this a little bit, but he was softer than parquet butter in the microwave when he got here, which is fantastic.
That is a good line.
Very, very guy born before 1965 reference there, but a good laugh. And it is. We talked about the line that you said, in our little text thread between us. It's clear, Kelvin's able to find guys who don't mind this roast, who take it as constructive criticism, and I don't want to seem like I'm laughing at the players, but I also find Kelvin's various little quips when guys mess up very funny.
Me too.
Not a whole lot else about this game. I thought this was funny. So Baylor's 9 of 15, 60% on 3-pointers is the best percentage any opponent has shot against the Cougars from deep this year. The best any Big 12 opponent has shot home or away against the Cougs, obviously, as well. Because the answer surprised me, Bobby, can you guess before this game which Big 12 opponent had shot the best against the Cougars previously, prior to Baylor's 9 of 15 effort last night? One or two tries. I don't want to waste too much time on this. It's a surprising one. That's my hint to you.
Corpus Christi.
Big 12 game. It's a Big 12. That was the preface to my.
Oh, my bad.
You're good.
I don't know how I missed that. Kansas State.
BYU.
Okay.
You don't think about that because you beat them by 32 and just really ran them off the court. I was like, oh yeah, they kind of in between just turning the ball over and getting killed by you. They made some 3-pointers, but that was just one of those. Like it's like how on the Ion College basketball they do the random trivia times in there. Like I had the little trivia time in my head when I saw them. Like BYU, nice. BYU is the next best 3-point shooting team. Didn't remember it like that.
Yeah, me neither.
Bottom line, I think this Baylor game, we all wanted to see a more complete effort against a better opponent after you kind of just survived against OSU and Colorado. Big check in that box, and I don't think you even did it with an A+ all-around effort. Just a reminder of how good this team is. And always, always, always nice to beat the Baylor Bears in any sport.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing that makes me happier. I mean, there is, but that's up there.
We'll say sports-wise. Not exaggerating, Bob, but we have an enormous Cougar game on Saturday. If it wasn't for Alabama-Auburn, which is a current 1v2 matchup, also happening on Saturday, I would think this game has a good case for the best men's basketball matchup of the day. Cougs going to Tucson to take on the Arizona Wildcats. I don't think I would have predicted that Arizona would start as strong as they have in Big 12 play, but I'm also not surprised that the Wildcats are better now than how they looked at times in November and December. This is a veteran team with a ton of offensive skill, ton of size, and playing at a venue in the McHale Center that never an easy place to play under any circumstances, but for a matchup this big with potential first place in the Big 12 stakes on the line will absolutely be rocky on Saturday afternoon. Bobby, what have you learned that you would like to share with me and those of the people listening at home about the Wildcats?
Yeah, such a wildly different team than the one that started this season. At one point, they were 4-5 with losses to OU, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. Not teams that are...
Real quick, so the Wisconsin one was the same night as the ill-fated football game, and we had it ended up being such a rout that the football team actually got like a better crowd than expected because a lot of people bailed on because Wisconsin beat them by 15, and it was like one of those where it was as bad as the final score. So I actually was surprised how full the crowd was when I showed up there in Tucson. Sorry.
Yeah. No. And so you didn't expect them to come in here and only have one loss in Big 12 play. You know, they had a lot of hype kind of going into the season, but you didn't, once you saw how the season kind of started for them, you didn't really expect it to go how it ended up going, you know? But since conference play, they only have one loss, like I said. And like the Cougs, it is to the Texas Tech Red Raiders, which I think we both hate. Both us and Arizona hate losing to Texas Tech. Guy to watch for them is Caleb Love. He's averaging 16.3 points per game. I want to watch. I said, the guards are starting to score. How does this Cougar defense fare against Caleb Love? How does Caleb Love fare against the Cougs, right? If he starts trying to get pick and rolls and he gets hit with that monster defense that the Cougs like to do, that monster havoc, whatever you want to call it, defense, can he pass his way out? That's not really something that he's experienced a lot of this year. He's usually getting some pretty open looks. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does against that. And if our guards can keep up, should be pretty fun to watch. Game. Another thing to watch will be Arizona's ability to get offensive rebounds. According to KenPom, hold on. I didn't write it down. According to KenPom, I want to say the
first.
Yeah, something like that. Like 21st, 22nd. Now I gotta look. 21st in offensive rebounding. That's pretty good. And the Cougs, are 111th in defensive rebounding, but everything gets kind of close in that range. So if Arizona starts getting free shots because they're getting offensive rebounds, that can get a little concerning. I don't get too concerned with the Cougs winning the rebounding battle, but the difference in 4 or 5 offensive rebounds more than a normal team gets, that's 6 to 10 points typically. That's the difference in this game at times if you're not keeping them off the offensive board.
This Arizona team does some of the key things that have been proven to stress this year's Houston Cougar team out. They play the game at a much quicker tempo than the Cougs, and they're pretty good at getting the free throw line. It's not a guarantee that a faster tempo team will beat the Cougs, but Bama certainly did it in November. And I don't think I'm being unfair in describing them this. Inferior UCF and Oklahoma State teams were able to make those games varying degrees of close, I think in large part because they made U of H play at their tempo, played a tempo that they're not as comfortable playing. And I don't think I'm being unfair, again, to UCF and OSU in saying that Arizona is a much, much better team, more talented, more effective than those two are. Caleb Love, first guy in the scouting report, glad you mentioned him. He's got a number of teammates at Arizona who are better shooters, but he's just that super veteran guy who's played in so many high-stakes basketball games. He's also the best of this U of A team at getting to the free throw line as well, a big part of what they do well. I'm really excited about the big man matchup in this one. The Wildcats have Toby Awaka, one of the best offensive rebounders in college basketball, a guy with recent dominant offensive performances against conference opponents Texas Tech and Iowa State. They also have 7-footer Henry Visar, who's a skilled scorer and shot blocker, along with being a plus rebounder. With Awaka, I mean, both those guys, Visar and Awaka, ate Tech's lunch last Saturday in Tucson. Much as U of A has Caleb Love, KJ Lewis, and other more kind of guard wing guys who scare me, I really do think this is a game that's going to be won or lost here in the front court. And we saw U of H was able to win against a Kansas team that, for all of its flaws, has a couple of the best scoring big men in the country in Badunga and Hunter Dickinson. So not saying it's impossible U of H wins this, but I think anything other than an A effort from the likes of Wani Roberts, JoJo Tugler, and Javier Francis will be punished badly by this opponent. One guy to watch, some injury question around every game starter, or at least every game starter before he got hurt, Trey Townsend. He missed the Texas Tech game in concussion protocol, left that previous game against BYU. If I had to guess, he'll be back for this one on Saturday, but I would imagine Wildcat fans would rather he's coming in not off any kind of injury left. If you don't know, Townsend was actually the leading scorer and the Horizon League Player of the Year on that Oakland team. I know Jack Bulkey, their super duper senior, got a lot of the attention. He had that fantastic performance against Kentucky, but Trey Townsend was the biggest reason why Oakland was in the NCAA tournament, used his grad year to play for U of A. Hasn't had the same level of success at Arizona, but is a valuable veteran player, and I think they'll very much want to have him back. I mean, one of those things when you look up and down Arizona, Bobby, their team stats, the Ken Palm stat page, if you will, it's notable how few areas Arizona has the little red in where they actually struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I guess the good news for Cougar fans after a rough stretch of opponents who are being just super hot from deep, Arizona does not take a lot of three-pointers. They don't make a lot of three-pointers. They're also fine at protecting the basketball, not great. They're fine, but not great at turning opponents over. That's a big thing playing the Cougars. But to emphasize what you said, very, very good offensive rebounding team. Only slightly worse than the Cougars there, and the Cougars are pretty elite company. Yep. I'm curious. It's actually tipping off right now, and one of those things that I wish I could have recorded this knowing how they're going to do against Kansas State, because that's a really intriguing matchup they're playing. Tonight, if you're listening, you'll probably know the score up, but K-State is just red hot, and they've beaten some really good teams during, I think, a 5-6 game winning streak they're on. And Arizona's playing in Manhattan. I'm curious how that one goes. That's, I think, going to tell us a lot. I don't know if I'd rather they win or lose. I feel like they go back to Tucson off a loss. You're going to get them as hungry and focused as they've been in a while. But also, if they beat a red hot K-State team at K-State, it's just oh man, that's going to be a tough one. I mean, it's going to be a tough one regardless on Saturday, but that's just one other thing.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a tough game no matter what here.
Yeah, I know. Bottom line, Cougs are going to need to deal with one of the few road venues out there that I would say is on the same level as Fog Allen Fieldhouse, an opponent with even more ways to stress you out than Kansas did. I'm going to be there in person in Tucson Saturday. It was originally going to be with my co-host here, but work interfered. Fingers crossed we can make it happen next season. That was one of those things when Arizona joined the conference, Bobby. I was just like, I got to see a game at the McHale Center. Like it is.
Yeah.
And you have, like, I've seen them a couple different times at the Pac-12, the RIP Pac-12 tournaments in Vegas. Like U of A travels well. That's why when I rolled my eyes so hard when U of A fans were complaining in the 2022 tournament about like, oh, well, Houston gets to be in San Antonio.
Oh,
You're fucking Arizona. You're the last team west of the Rockies to win a national championship. You're one of the most storied programs of the last 30, 35 years. And like, they're supported like one. Like those games they would play in Vegas, it was, even when it was ASU, even when it was teams geographically close, even when it was like UCLA, it would be at least 75-80% U of A fans. Like that.
Oh, yeah.
That is their sport. Like they are fanatic about basketball, and I'm excited to see a true temple of the sport in the McHale Center.
Yeah, man, it should be awesome.
And just an opponent good enough to beat the Cougars, but it feels like anything coming after playing at U of A is going to seem kind of less important by comparison, but the Cougars are staying in the Grand Canyon State and playing their slightly less successful, at least when it comes to basketball, cohorts at Arizona State University, the Sun Devils, who have lost 4 of their last 5 coming in, with the one being an even less convincing win over Colorado than the Cougars had. And that number will probably be 5 in the last 6 when they play at Tech tomorrow night.
Mm-hmm.
Still not counting my chickens before they hatch here. ASU has wins this season over St. Mary's in West Virginia. They took Baylor to OT earlier in Big 12 play. This is one the Cougars should win, but ASU absolutely has some of the ingredients for the upset, along with the weirder, less successful Hurley brother who's coaching in college basketball. They've definitely got him. Tell me what you've learned about the Sun Devils, Bobby.
Yeah, just I don't know, should be an easier game to win than Arizona, like we said. The Sun Devils are very much a like great value version U of H. Not to be like, I know that sounds very condescending, but it's just kind of how I feel.
I think it actually flatters Arizona State, honestly.
I think just like a great value version where it's like, if you squint your eyes good enough, this kind of tastes like Frosted Flakes. Really good defense, top 50 defense. The offense is outside of the top 100, not very good offensively. Some of the early Kelvin Sampson teams, where you kind of were like, boy, if this team could just make a bucket, it'd be really dangerous. That's kind of how I feel a little bit about Arizona State. Whereas, that top 50 defense, if that offense could be top 75, they're not where they're at. They're a lot better than they are. So I that's kind of what I saw. On offense, they do like to turn the ball over, which for U of H is a major positive because U of H loves to turn people over. The Sun Devils also give up a ton of offensive rebounds, which I don't know if you know this, Sam. The Cougs are good at getting offensive rebounds. So if the Cougs can play like the Cougs are supposed to play and can play and are capable of playing, I don't see this being too difficult of a game for the Houston Cougars.
Their young big guy, Jaden Quaintance, he's one of those freshmen I'm buying stock in long term. He should be a high school senior this year, and yet he's already an efficient scorer at the college level, a plus rebounder, one of the best shot blockers in the country. Like he's not a one and done guy. Imagine in a couple years, like how good this guy could be. Mm-hmm. I think that Jaden Quaintance versus Tugler, Francis, and Roberts matchup will be, as much as anything from this game, appointment viewing. I love the trio front court guys I just said, but just as a fan of basketball, I'd like to see how this matchup plays out. Mm-hmm. On the court, they also have another interesting big man, stretch guy, Bashir Jihad, will also be a matchup challenge for the Cougar front court. Unlike Quaintance, is both good at getting the free throw line and actually good at making those freebies as well. A skill that Quaintance is working on. He's sub 50% from the line, as you might expect a young big guy to be. The Sun Devils don't play as fast as U of A, but they'll also play the game at a bit quicker tempo than I'd say the Cougars would probably prefer. I think where sketching out the upset for Arizona State gets challenging is the fact that they're not a good offensive rebounding team, despite having Quaintance, a good offensive rebounder, and what you said a little earlier, that they turn the ball over a lot. To beat this Cougar team, you have to either be a super high-level offensive team, which I would say generally describes Auburn, Alabama, Texas Tech, or a super high-level defensive team, San Diego State, and even they needed overtime in a very tight margin to win that basketball game. That's the one opponent. I mean, the win count's all the same. No SDSU fan should spend a second thinking about this. And they should very much enjoy that awesome non-conference win. That's the one opponent who I am absolutely dead set would not beat the Cougars game if this game gets played. Auburn, Alabama, and Tech are really good teams. Really good teams who beat the Cougs by a tight margin, but really good teams nonetheless. But back to my main point, ASU is a good defensive team by most metrics. I don't like their chance the way I would Arizona's during this road swing. And that's not me saying ASU couldn't possibly upset the Cougs. I just have a harder time seeing how they make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. If this one kind of feels a little bit more akin to Oklahoma State and Colorado than it does Arizona.
Yeah, if you're able to beat West Virginia, who I think is despite their head-to-head loss, I would say a team with a better resume on the balance of the season by a good margin, I think you should be able to win this one.
Yep.
And we have a little bit of football news because we were so jam-packed full of Cougar sports talk about last week that we had to save a less time-sensitive piece of news for this week's podcast. Bobby, time marches on, and sometimes in your 10th season of doing a podcast, you find yourself repeating the same news as I am now, a little over 4 years after Zach Etheridge left Dana Holgerson's U of H staff to take a position at Auburn. Zach Etheridge is now leaving Willie Fritz's U of H football staff for a similar position on a more cash-rich program. This time the destination at least is different. Etheridge will be taking a defensive backs coach position, or has taken a defensive backs coach position on the Miami Hurricane staff. And this was within a week or so that he had gotten pass game coordinator added to his title. My thoughts on this are pretty simple. Miami is investing a lot of money in their football program, NIL, and the more traditional outlets, more than U of H is certainly. If they really want one of our assistants, they'll probably get them. That's not me being fatalistic. That's just kind of life right now for this program. And best of luck to Etheridge, but that's just kind of where we are right now. That's my thought.
Yeah, I have no problem with, I mean, I think you and I have had this discussion before where, we can talk about it all we want to, and we can think about U of H all we want to. Anyone ever is poachable, plain and simple.
We also got a pretty quick. Sorry, what were you saying, man?
People get poached all the time from bigger programs. Heck, Notre Dame lost their coach to LSU a couple of years ago. So you can't. I mean, yeah, be upset, but at the end of the day, there's not really much that you're going to be able to do to stop it.
And we found out pretty quickly who would be Etheridge's replacement as Tulane football alum PJ Hall, who played for Willie Fritz from 2016 to 2019, who last season coached the defensive backs at FCS program. Tarleton State was named new Cougar cornerbacks coach. And the surface level stats on the Tarleton defense he was a part of the staff of are really good. They were 5th in all of FCS in interceptions, 17th in pass defense, finished the season as a team in the top 15, made the FCS playoffs and won their first ever FCS playoff game last season after transitioning a few years ago from Division II. Before last season, Hall was a defensive grad assistant at Baylor under Dave Aranda, who was one of the more respected defensive minds in the sport. This guy was playing in 2019. It's wild to think about. We probably did a Tulane preview 7-8 years ago, that probably 6-7 years ago, that mentioned PJ Hall as one of their guys, and now he's really coaching for the University of Houston. Again, just kind of like I said with the Etheridge thing, you're around long enough, you see some guys come back.
Yep.
But also, I mean, not a super lengthy resume, but worth remembering that Etheridge came to U of H as a guy who had one total season of FBS experience, is now leaving to go to Miami, one of the better programs out there. I mean, I think Willie Fritz obviously knows the guy very well as a 4-year defensive starter for him not that long ago. That he was hired that quickly, honestly, I think without having any inside knowledge, this is not me trying to report any news here, tells me that there's probably some contact there, either because of an expected departure by Etheridge or maybe bring Hall and kind of an assistant to Etheridge role. But small resume, but I like what I've seen in the small resume, and I'm certainly not going to blanch at hiring a young guy who knows this coach extremely well.
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta if Willie trust him, then I trust him. Dang it.
I would say agree with that one. Agree very much with that one. All right. A sport that's near and dear to our heart, Bobby. This Friday, the college baseball season commences. A sport that, we talk about the various U of H football games we went to at Robertson together. We talk about the games we went to at Hawthorne, but man, I have just a bottomless well of memories of just random late aughts baseball games that you and I went to during the latter days of the Rainer Noble era at the University of Houston. Love college baseball. We're going to preview the 2025 season, kind of starting with our most big picture thoughts and then zooming in a bit on the pitchers and hitters. Bobby, if I've said it once here, I've said it 1,000 times. I like Todd Whitting. I don't think Todd Whitting got the respect he deserved for how good this program was from 2014 to 2018. Unfortunately, it's been about that long since U of H has even come close to being on the NCAA tournament bubble, much less in the field. And I don't think it's expecting too much of Cougar baseball with the facilities you have at your disposal, your location, the history this program has to, we'll say every 2 or 3 seasons, be a serious threat to play for the postseason. And we're going on now 4 to 5 seasons of that emphatically not being the case. So how are you feeling about Cougar baseball right now? What's your temperature right now?
Yeah, just kind of looking big picture. We know there is more to being a college coach in any sport. There's more to it than X's and O's, right? And a big part of that extra is raising money. And I'd argue that there isn't a better coach in this athletic department at raising money for their program than Todd Whitting. For an athletic department that is screaming poor like U of H is, that's a massive deal, right? That's a huge deal. If Whitting can get funding to fund that program, even if it's the base level stuff, any dollar he brings in is huge. If you're looking strictly at X's and O's and performance on the field, Whitting wouldn't be your coach anymore. If that was the only criteria, I don't think Todd Whitting would be your coach anymore. It says a lot about how important fundraising is that he secured his 3-year extension before last season. He got that 3-year deal, and we can kind of laugh about it, but again, if it was about X's and O's, I don't think he's here, right? I'd say it's NCAA tournament or bust, but hell, I don't know anymore, right? I kind of thought that was the deal last year, maybe the year before that too. After August 1st, his buyout dropped to $100,000 this year. So maybe if he doesn't make the tournament, it becomes much more palatable to let him go with it just being $100,000. I say just $100,000, like that's still not a lot of money, but to a program in the Big 12, you'd hope that that's not prohibitive to letting him go in one of the 3 revenue sports that the NCAA recognizes as a revenue sport. But I guess the question if he goes is, do the donors walk away with him if he's not the head coach? That's kind of the millions of dollars question. I think I would love to see Todd Whitting as like the GM of the baseball program. And instead of buying him out and paying the $100,000, give him more of like an executive role within the athletic program of key fundraiser, that kind of stuff. He's a Cougar alum. He has the ties to the university. And so I wouldn't want to see him go all the way because I think he's a great ambassador. But who knows what's going to happen anymore?
About 3 weeks ago, the Big 12 preseason poll came out. The Cougars were picked 11th out of the 14 conference baseball programs. Seems fair, given how the recent seasons have gone. Your lone individual representative on the various preseason awards or all conference selection was Cade Clemmy. We'll say Cade Clemmy. And he was the Big 12 preseason newcomer of the year. And Clemmy is definitely a reason to be excited about this year's team. Also, D1 baseball, who I would say is the best out there. in the college baseball media space. Picked the Cougs near the bottom of the league as well. I want to say they had the Cougs 12th out of 14.
But they also said that we could contend for a Big 12 title.
It's crazy. Like, Kendall Rogers, great writer and Houston area guy, so he gets out to U of H a decent amount to cover the Cougs. Like, his bit is, Kendall Rogers hates my team. And it's kind of funny to juxtapose that and like him writing these sunny like fall like winning really likes the raw talent they have and the pitching staff this year. And it's like, oh man, it's been like 6 years since we've like pitched any good. Like this, come on, man. Like at a certain point, but on the coaching staff front, you lost your top recruiter and a rising star in the profession, and Ross Kivett, who went back to the staff at Tennessee where he started his coaching career. I do like U of H's staff though. You have Matt Rada in his second year. Like Kivett is a strong recruiter with SEC experience. Clay Van Hook joins the staff after spending the previous 2 seasons as the head coach at UT Arlington. A big part of him moving back to Houston, he was previously assistant at Rice, is his child getting treatment at the Houston Medical Center. So glad he's able to make that work better for his life. Like that's a tough thing if you're a parent. And Woody Williams, who was on staff in an off-field role last year, getting promoted to pitching coach. Previously worked at San Jack for a long time, a former longtime MLBer, and was the pitching coach at UT Austin when they had the best Big 12 ERA, I want to say, in the 2023 season. Looks like a good staff on paper, but not the first time I've said that before a U of H baseball season that didn't go to expectations. I think our most sincere hope is that this ends up being the first time in 7 years, that we're talking about a team with the actual real potential to make the postseason, because alluded to at the top, we love college baseball. Some of my best memories as a younger Cougar fan were just going to random baseball games with my good friends, including my co-host here and my co-host Emeritus. And if anything, Schrader Park's become a nicer place to watch a game because of Todd Whitting's fundraising in large part since those younger years. It's just, I mean, the recent results speak for themselves. I'll believe this team is an NCAA tournament team when I see it happen.
Yeah, and I mean, that last year in the American, you kind of got close just because of how much you tore up that conference, but last year just wasn't very good. It's big picture-wise, it's all about the guy at the top, and is this going to be the year that we kind of figure it out? So do you want to kind of talk about some of the players and what we might see coming in, Sam?
Yeah, let's do it. We'll start with the hitters and position players, and if you don't mind, Bobby.
Yeah, let's do it. So I really tried to kind of look at the roster and build a starting 9, and you only really return a couple of guys from last year. I'd venture to say you returned maybe one big bat from last year that you're kind of excited about. The lineup could legitimately be 7 to 8 new faces in the starting lineup. You could have 7 to 8 guys who weren't in the starting lineup last year in your starting lineup this year. You might be able to go all 9 if you really wanted to feel crazy, you know? Now, some of the new guys could be good, right? Like, that's kind of the whole deal with this team is, yeah, some of these guys could be good if you I get really excited for a guy like Tyler Cox, hit 380 at Dartmouth. I know it's the Ivy League, not the SEC, but if you're hitting 380, you're doing pretty good. Hitting 380 anywhere is solid. I'm also excited to see Irvin Weems from San Diego State hit 257 last year at San Diego State, 7 home runs last year as well. So you're going to see a bunch of new faces, and the whole thing with the position players this year is, how do they do? Like, and we'll talk more about that as we go along with when we talk about the pitchers. Like, there's some talent here. There's some guys who have looked good in other places. They just haven't played at this level really. And if they have played at a higher level, they didn't play very much at that higher level. So you don't really know what you're getting with a lot of guys in this lineup. If they play how they should, or how we kind of expect, I think we're going to be solid. I think this team has a chance, but in terms of the lineup, there's going to be a lot of new faces. What did you see, Sam?
Worth a quick reminder of who is not here. Kerry Arboleda, who was your top average and home runs guy last year. It just weird situation because how long he was in college. He only had non-D1 eligibility left. Justin Murray, Harold Call, Trey Jones have all graduated. Your top freshman last year, Ace Reese, transferred to Mississippi State. The only hitters from 2024 who played a good chunk of your games and are back are Kobe DeJesus and Kenneth Jimenez.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't on the balance a really great hitting or fielding team a year ago, so maybe not a crisis that's mostly new faces, but it's rare that you hit on every or even most of the new faces you bring in, especially if, like you said, a lot of these guys don't have the specific experience at this level. I was excited to see a former Cougar, now current Cougar once again, Malachi Lott, back with the Cougs after playing at Sam Houston last year. He played the previous 2 seasons at U of H. I thought he was one of your promising young guys during that period. I expect Lott will also pitch some for you, but if I had to guess, he'll play more in the field. Last season at Sam had a career high 10 home runs, batted .303 for the Bearcats. Maybe play some in the outfield, maybe some at DH. Obviously, he's got to pitch some as well. I expect maybe he'll be a midweek long guy somewhere in there. Really want to talk about Cade Clemmy, the guy who I mentioned as the Big 12 preseason newcomer of the year. Local guy, played originally at Seven Lakes High School, had a monster junior college last season. Junior college season for Blinn, who were the JUCO national champs, was the NJCAA World Series MVP and most valuable hitter. Hit .394 for the season, 20 home runs, 76 ribbies. Also hit .358 as a freshman at Temple College. Did a semester at A&M, but ended up playing the 23 season at Temple. I think for any of the uncertainty about this season, I'm really excited to watch Clemmy play for the Cougs. I have a hard time seeing his U of H career lasting more than a season with the kind of pedigree he has from junior college ball. Mm-hmm. And Aaron Lugo is a really intriguing guy. Played last season at Texas State, hit a team leading .326 for the Bobcats. Was tied for the team lead with 10 dingers in what was his first D1 season a year ago for the Bobcats. One of those big early viral moments of the college baseball season is actually Lugo blowing a bubble as he hit the go-ahead 2-run homer for the Bobcats, the Minute Maid Classic against the Longhorns. Also tied for their team lead in doubles, was 14 of 15 on stolen bases. Could probably write him in Sharpie as your opening day starter at third base. And the only other guy I wanted to name check here, Trey Broussard, comes in from San Jack. Only played his freshman season there last year, but hit a team best 409, had more walks than strikeouts, was a first-team all-region selection with Clemmy. San Jack probably goes further in the JUCO playoffs if they're not in the same region as Blinn, who ultimately eliminated them in the Supers. I expect him to be a day one starter as well. Not a power guy like Clemmy or Lugo, but an exciting bat and I think a plus defensive guy as well. I want to actually mention a couple other guys who you did mention as well. You mentioned Tyler Cox and Irvin Weems. I think those guys have a good case to be stars as well. I think Cox is probably your opening day starter shortstop. Jake Tatum comes in with Malachi Lott from Sam Houston, had a really strong 2023 season, was named to the WAC all-tournament team for the eventual conference champs, hit .386 as a freshman. His usage went up last year. His numbers declined, but I think there's still enough there in his resume to make me intrigued. And a teammate of Clemmy's at Blinn, Connor McGinnis, is interesting to me. He missed his first 2 JUCO seasons with injuries, but was really strong last year. Hit .399 with 15 home runs, was the Region 14 Player of the Year, had 31 multi-hit games. He's not the pro prospect that Clemmy is, but really exciting numbers at that level. And you generally see JUCO guys able to translate it to the Division I level, at least if they're doing as well as him. I don't need to be sold too hard on this being a better lineup than 2024. I think the unfortunate thing is that you also have to pitch well to be a good team, and that's been this program's biggest challenge. If you're done with the hitters, Bobby.
Yeah, I'm done with the hitters. Let's go, buddy.
I'm having that side tells you I'm having a harder time mapping out how U of H is going to have the pitching to stand up to Big 12 lineups in the coming season, which you didn't do last season. I mean, in terms of guys who have started games for you, there's Antoine Jean, a super senior with a history of arm trouble, and he was solid at the start of last year, but really, really struggled in the back half of the season. Paul Schmitz, Big German, who was arguably your best starting pitcher 2 seasons ago, but missed the early part of last year, hurt, didn't really look that great out of the bullpen. I saw in the Big 12 preview that D1 Baseball did that Richie Roman, good chance that he's one of your weekend starters. And I mean, numbers weren't great his freshman season. Has a live arm. Wouldn't be the first guy to have an iffy freshman season and put it together later in his career. But I mean, you're just so short on you're short on proven Division I hitters, but you have enough guys coming in where you're just like, oh yeah, like I can see these 4 to 6 guys being able to do it at the Division I level.
Mm-hmm.
Who are those guys in this pitching staff? And I'm not expecting you to have answers for that because I don't know.
You know, I think I wrote down here in my notes that this is very much a, it feels like this is a bunch of guys who have done decent at other levels, and you're hoping 2 of them hit, 3 of them hit, and then you can piece together a weekend rotation. There's just so much unknown. I just don't know, right? I don't know what these guys are going to do. We could have some studs here, right? Everyone they've brought in looks good on paper, and you would hope that you bring in guys who look good on paper. The problem is we've brought in guys before who looked good on paper, and they didn't do well at this level. That, you know, when you step up a level, batter, you know, swing speed increases, all that kind of stuff increases. Your stuff's got to be a lot sharper. You got to be able to throw strikes. And I don't know, man. Like, this staff could be really good if the guys hit that have the experience that have looked good at other levels. Like, this staff could be good on paper. It's just, will it be? That's the $1 million question.
You have Diego Luzardo, Ryan Dollar, Grayson Drezik, Alex Solis, and Michael Benzor, in addition to Richie Roman, who I mentioned earlier, and Paul Schmitz and Antoine Jean. All saw a decent amount of action last year, but out of all those guys, really only Luzardo and Benzor had decent ERAs, and Benzor's walks per 9 wasn't great. I mean, maybe 2 or 3 of those guys improve, and you have the experience for the lumps that some of these guys took early in their career, but another kind of believe it when I see it situation. I am intrigued by Andres Perez, who comes in from Lamar, and there's good stuff in his college resume. Low ERA both seasons he was at Lamar, had 6 saves for the Cardinals in 2024. Good strikeout numbers, but also not great walk numbers, and he's about to face a much tougher level of competition. You could say also for David Stitch and Harrison Bichelle, who all had good numbers for non-D1 programs, but non-D1 players are such a gamble, and both those guys, Stitch and Bichelle, have injury history. Chris Cinta comes in from Miami, had a really strong freshman season 2 years ago, but I don't think there's any way you could describe his 2024 season as anything but pretty bad. I do like Woody Williams' resume as a college coach. I like it more than anyone we've had since Frank Anderson. Did a good job developing guys at San Jack. His 2023 UT staff led the Big 12 in team ERA. I struggle to see a staff remotely on the level of the ones we had under Anderson. Maybe Woody Williams lays hands on these guys and it's a much better staff than we expect. I think this lineup can be good enough that if you give me like mid 4s with not terrible walk and wild pitch numbers for a team ERA, I'm feeling pretty good about the season, Bobby.
Yeah, me too.
But the trick there, you got to actually get to mid 4s in ERA. You got to actually do it. And we've both said it in differing words. Kind of believe it when we see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So some quick scheduling thoughts. You'd be opening this weekend against Minnesota, who pretty similar in terms of the metrics to the Cougars last year. The Gophers in the preseason were picked 12th out of the 17 teams in the Big Ten preseason poll. My initial thought was that the Cougs should sweep. Co-host Emeritus Dustin kind of talked me into being a bit less harsh on the Cougs as Minnesota. I was kind of going on the Minnesota I remember from 2 seasons ago, who was absolutely terrible when we played them on the road. They're better. If we can take 2 of 3 and look decent pitching, I'll feel okay about it. The Gophers were a really good power hitting team a year ago, but they lost their top home run hitters, Brady Council and Ike Mazenga, but they do return their top 3 average guys from a season ago, Josh Fitzgerald, Weber Niels, and Jake Peary. Not going to say anything will be proof positive after one weekend with 3 potential baseball games against a team that's probably going to be bottom half of the Big Ten, but if you could just see some good stuff from the pitching staff and hitters, if you can get a sweep, I'm starving for things to be excited about with Cougar baseball, so I'd be pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, give me 2 for 1, or give me a 2-in-1 weekend, and I'll be fairly happy. Just, you don't want to lose early things. The classic. You can't win a championship early, but you can lose it. You can't lose a bit. You can't win a bit early, but you can lose it. I would love to see 2-in-1 with some. I think the first couple of weeks of the season, we're just going to see Coach Whitting trying to figure out who's going to be his staff, who's going to be his Friday, Saturday, Sunday guys.
And some quick additional thoughts on the rest of the schedule, as we kind of like to do at the beginning of a season. You got a couple of really interesting ones next week. In Central Texas, you're going to be playing at UT in Austin on Tuesday, and then you'll be playing Oregon State in Round Rock on Wednesday. Not a super challenging non-conference beyond that. You have a series at Cal the following weekend. UTA, actually in your neck of the woods, Bobby, at the end of February, early March. Then Grambling State at home for the final non-conference weekend series. And you have the usual midweek 3-game series with Rice and Sam Houston, one-offs with UTRGV, SFA, A&M Corpus, A&M College Station, Lamar, and a roadie to McNeese. And then your Big 12 home series are Texas Tech, TCU, West Virginia, Utah, and Arizona. And then your Big 12 road series are UCF, Baylor, Oklahoma State, K-State, and ASU. My big thought about that is, unfortunately, you miss 3, I think, winnable potential series with BYU, Cincy, and Kansas. Utah is the only team not in the preseason top 5 of the conference on your home slate. I would say that's about the worst draw imaginable there. The good news, if there's any good news here, is that you won't be hurting for a potential resume building Big 12 wins. You just have to find enough pitching and hitting to actually win some of those games.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the schedule is, you do get, like you said, A&M late in the season at your house. A&M's going to be a good team. That place will be packed like it always is. So that'll be kind of a fun one. Going on the road to Oklahoma State, that'll be a fun little series there as well.
And last but not least, this week we had metaphorical boots in the ground for Cougar Tennis and the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, which we will kick around in this week's Cougar Tennis Corner. So before we get to that match with SMU and Dallas, we'll note pretty quickly, as I expected, right after we finished recording our last podcast, the Cougar match at Rice went final, and it was a 4-0 loss. Not a ton of new stuff to add there. In her post-match comments, head coach Kat Adamovich said it was not a good singles effort after coming up pretty close in 2 of the 3 doubles matches. I think, candidly, if you play every singles match till the end, even after Rice clinched it, maybe you win 1 or 2, but wasn't your best effort. I will say 2 days later on Friday afternoon in Dallas, the effort against SMU was much better. Even a losing effort, I still saw a team that's so much better than any recent season. I'll get to kind of the summary of who won, who lost, the scores, and all that jazz. But as I said a moment ago, because you were there in person, Bobby, I will ask you to tell us about how you've caught the Cougar Tennis fever and how that match went.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. I got there right as the doubles points were kind of wrapping up. I caught the last couple of games of the doubles matches. Cougs win the doubles point, which was super exciting. And then 6 matches going on at one time. And, you can see early on there were 2 matches. I can't remember who was the losing match for the Cougs, but you saw Santa really come out and dominate her match. So those 2 kind of, the one where you won heavily, the one you lost heavily, you kind of ignore those, as crazy as that sounds. And then at that point it's 2-1 first to 4 wins, and you have 2 matches go to tiebreakers in the first set. Very close. Cougs unfortunately dropped both of those, I believe, those tiebreakers, and you start to see a little bit of the writing on the wall. And then as games start to wind down, you start going, okay, Cougs lost this one, they won this one. It's going to come down to this match. Let's go across the tennis complex, go watch that one. It's a little bit further ahead. The other one was literally the other side of, so it was on like courts 1 and court 6 were the two most important matches. And you can see the one on court 6, I believe, was going to kind of be the decider. If the Cougs won that one, then it was going to come down to the 7th match. Unfortunately, the Cougs don't, but man, ton of fun. A lot of fun observations just being there. The funniest thing to me, I think I told you this, Sam, there were 2 observations. So I've been to, 4 matches now in DFW, or at least 4 events, because I had TCU last year and then 3 so far this year. So I've been to, 4 events. I know one of the ones was like a UTTA or whatever it is.
Yeah, it was the ITA Texas Regional, yeah.
Yeah, so like that's not really a U of H event, but okay. So here in DFW, there is one ref. I don't know her name. I recognize her though. And the first match I went to ever.
It's like the volleyball ref who's kind of like a slightly fatter version of Duarte.
Yeah.
No offense, Duarte, if you're listening.
Just it's just one of those, you just recognize them. And I recognize her because her and Kat do not get along. All right. I mean, Kat will argue with everything that lady says. And it so happened that her match finished early and she was doing line judging. And SMU hated her too. And I think I texted you, objectively, like, not as a fan of, a team or anything. She's a terrible ref. Like, she's awful. Like, the ball will go out and she'll just kind of sit there for a second and just freeze and then be like, it was in. And you're like, are you sure? Right? I think one of the most insane things that I see in the sport is that the players call their own shots, like in or out.
It is, but now you see who's reffing it, so is it that insane?
But there is a chair ump, right, who has the final say and can kind of see things. But that was crazy to me. It's just like, oh no, that. And SMU there was a couple of matches where SMU did not agree with the calls that U of H was making. But then it was kind of backed up by the ref, who I said was objectively terrible. Not because she makes bad calls, but just she doesn't know. She has to think about it. And that's just, as a sports fan, that's not something you necessarily
gotta be decisive. Good, bad, or different. You gotta be decisive.
Yeah, you don't want your ref to be like, maybe, I don't know. Don't want that. That was kind of observation number 1. Every time I go to one of their matches, you can see that, almost like coaches oh my God, I got to deal with this lady again. The second objectively funny thing that I pointed out to you is, after their match is done, they can watch the other matches, but they don't go into the stands or go sit on a bench or something like that. The players who aren't participating just stand in the middle of the court to watch the game, the court next to the match they're watching. And so they'll just be 3 players in the middle of the court, and then there'll be 2 on the other side, and they're just kind of standing there like this, watching, cheering. And then the part that made me laugh, when they switch sides, the players watching switch sides. And I don't know why I found that so funny, but just it's time to switch sides, and all the players oh yeah, we need to go over here. So they couldn't yell at the. It was just the funniest thing in the world to me. There's just 3 women just standing there. They're not running around getting excited. They're not doing anything like that. They're just standing there like I was in the stands. You would think that there'd be a team bench somewhere, but there's no room on the court to have a team bench because it's all courts. So you maybe go up into the sand. I don't know. It was just so funny to me. so funny to just be standing on an empty court in the middle of it too. It's not like they brought a bench over. They just stand there. It was so funny.
Well, note, like you said, Cougs won the doubles point. Dominant wins for the Cougs on both the courts too. And unfortunately, a dominant SMU win on court 2, but the Cougs were able to take the doubles point. Not surprisingly, Strumbaha and Morozova did very well on court 1, but what's really been, I think, kind of a cool developing thing in the early season for Cougar tennis is how well Sophie Skoten and Gabby Cortez have done on court 3. They got off to kind of a rocky start in the opener against UTA and have played really, really well since then. The doubles point against Rice was super close as well. You had 2 of those 3 go into tiebreakers, and your court 1 and 3 doubles pairs are now combined 6 and 2 in the season. I think now it's just about figuring out how you can get more from Seppa and Krohatina on court 2. Like you said, Bobby, Santa's match, there wasn't much drama, but again, a good way for the Cougs. She won 6-2, 6-2 over Sophie Llewellyn. I think your biggest missed opportunity was Lisa Morozova on court 4, who's been one of your best singles players outside of Strumbaha, losing the first set from a lead. And then, as you kind of see sometimes in tennis, that snowballed in the second set and ultimately lost in straight sets to Ariana Stavropoulos. And you said the first one that went final, Valeria Krohatina, she lost her first set, but then won the second, but ultimately lost in 3 sets, and that was the deciding one. Sophie Skoten was in her third set, but was down in that one. Hedda Newtonen and Eva Seppa lost on courts 3 and 2, respectively. But I don't want to come across as negative in any way. This was always going to be a challenging opponent as soon as the schedule became official, and with Big 12 play starting here at the end of the month, you needed to face, not that you didn't get anything from the games against UNT, UT Arlington, and Tarleton, but you needed to face some NCAA level opponents. And that's what Rice and SMU were. You didn't do great against Rice. I think you did reasonably well against SMU. You needed that challenge. And now it's about what did you learn about yourself, and can you get that final non-conference win against UTSA here this coming Sunday?
Yeah, hope you can. That would be that'd be huge for the program.
Yeah, the Roadrunners are currently in the middle of a 10-0 start to the season. They were arguably the best non-SMU AAC program a season ago. Also beat the Cougars 4-2 in Houston about 12 months ago. But I also don't think I'm being uncharitable to the Roadrunners and saying that U of H would be 10-0 against the slate of opponents UTSA has played to date. They'll play common opponent Tarleton on Saturday. I'm curious how that one goes, because I think Tarleton's a quality, smaller conference squad. UTSA has 2 good veteran players at the top of their projected order. Ikua Yuri, who's still undefeated in spring singles play, and Leticia Corsina. Strumbaha actually defeated Yuri in the ITA Texas Championship. That was the match actually immediately after the one you saw, where she beat Tommy Main from TCU. And Sophie Skoten also defeated Corsini at the opening fall event at Baylor. The Cougs collectively were 4-3 against UTSA players in the fall slate. I think UTSA is closer to UNT and Tarleton than, say, SMU or Rice, but I will say the Cougs will need to play better, especially in singles, to comfortably win what will be their final non-conference matchup. And that's all we got, Bobby. Take us home.
Yeah, so that is it for this week. We kind of went a little bit shorter this week, I think, by a few minutes, but thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you have some feedback for us, you can find us on Blue Sky at podcast.bsky.social. If you reach out to us on Twitter, we are still on there, so you can find us on at SH Podcast on Twitter. And then if you have swore off social media because you want to, good for you. I'm happy for you. You can always email us at shpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to give us 5 stars on your, we don't ask for this very often. Give us 5 stars on your podcast listening place of your preference. Just, it makes it easier for Cougar fans to find us. A lot of podcasts want it because it gives them better opportunities, better things like that. We don't. We just want to get into more ears just because we like talking U of H stuff. And if you also subscribe to our partners, the 1012 podcast, they do a good weekly show. I will tell you, you won't get much Cougar softball coverage from us this year, but if you are interested in Big 12 softball, there's not a better place to listen than the 10-12 podcast. Just give those guys a shout out, even though you're not going to hear much from us because we don't necessarily agree with what that program is going through right now. So, if you like what we do, you want to throw a couple of bucks behind us, we thank you so much for that. You can find us on Patreon at SH Podcast. Most of that money goes to us and what we do every week in terms of hosting this. That's not free. New microphones, anything like that we need. And then it usually, the extra money goes to us going to a U of H game. Since we are out of town, it usually pays for our travel to get to a U of H game, to watch it, to cover it a little bit better for you guys. So we appreciate anybody who does it. Anyone who's still listening, we appreciate you as well. And as always, Sam,
go Cougs.
All right. Go Cougs! Let's go!